welcome to this panel on digital regulatory reform, from Digital Omnibus to digital sovereignty. I am Isabelle Verreken, and I'm the head of the Secretariat of the European Data Protection Board. It's a European body gathering all data protection authorities in Europe, and our purpose is to bring consistency of data protection laws in Europe. So Europe digital policy is entering a new phase. Over the past decade, European Union has been one of the world's most famous digital regulatory framework. We started with the GDPR, and then more recently with several additional layers, such as the Digital Service Act, the Digital Market Act, the AI Act, the Data Act, and also the update of the cybersecurity legislations. At the same time, the EU is increasingly speaking the language of competitiveness, simplification, and technological sovereignty. In 2024, the Draghi report provided a high-level reflection on Europe's competitiveness in a rapidly evolving global economy. One of its key messages was the need to simplify the European regulatory framework, particularly in the digital sphere, in order to reduce burden and foster innovation. This has led to digital omnibuses proposals. When it comes to simplification, the European Data Protection Board, of course, supports simplification. We also support the objective to support innovation, as long as it is not at the expense of fundamental rights. This is why the DPP supports many of the proposals of the Commission made in the Digital Omnibus proposal, but advised strongly against the change of definition of the concept of personal data, as it will not create clarity, but rather will affect legal certainty and trust. The concept of digital sovereignty has become central as well in EU debates, even if we learned yesterday that the European Commission decided to postpone the presentation of its package of the technological sovereignty to June 3rd. So we saw that the EU showed its ability to regulate the digital space according to its own values. But now the question relates more to the strategic dependencies on non-European technologies and infrastructures, or to ensure that Europeans retain meaningful control over the data. Also digital infrastructure, but also democratic processes. But these raise difficult questions. Can Europe remain globally competitive while maintaining at the same time a high level of protection of fundamental rights? Does regulation create trust and therefore innovation, or does it risk slowing down European technological developments? And in a geopolitical environment increasingly shaped by technological dependencies, what more European digital sovereignty actually require? Today's discussion aims to explore these tensions in an open and balanced way, bringing together perspectives from the consumer protection, the industry, public authorities, and academia. Let me briefly present the panelists to you. So we have Victoria de Poisson. She's Secretary General of the European Tech Alliance, where she represents European-born digital companies in EU policymaking. Then, just next to me, Charlie Helleput is a lawyer which has extensive experience in advising clients on cybersecurity, privacy matters in complex cross-border contexts, navigating multiple regulatory and enforcement framework. He's also a lecturer at the University of St. Louis here in Brussels, and also at the Catholic University of Lille in France. Then on the right, Augustin Rea is the Director General of BUC, the European Consumer Organization, which serves as an umbrella group or 42 independent consumer association organizations across 31 European countries. And then at the very end, not the least, of course, Jenken van Dieven is the Justice and Home Affairs Counselor at the Permanent Representation of the Kingdom of Netherlands to the European Union, so the Netherlands PermRep. As such, he represents the Netherlands in constant negotiation in all data protection files, including the Digital Omnibus. So we start to explore a bit the relationship between regulation and innovation. And I would like to explore with you if the data protection framework helps or hinders innovation. And I will start with you, Victoria. Can a strong data protection framework hinder innovation, or can it actually be a competitive advantage for European companies?
Thank you very much, Isabelle. Maybe just a few words on the European Tech Alliance. I represent all the European tech that are born and bred in Europe. That means they were founded in Europe, that are headquartered in Europe with European leadership and research and development. And I'm sure on your phone, you certainly have some of our champions, whether that would be the Swedish company Spotify. You might have come to Brussels or used the Bolt, the Estonian company here. And I just want to pause a minute because we have some amazing European tech. And we're actually not proud enough of it. We very often are doing amazing stuff and we're not saying it. We say, I've done something not too bad. Well, some other regions are doing something rather mediocre, but saying that they're doing something amazing. So kind of want to stop it but start by saying we have amazing champions and we should be proud of it. Now, that said, to your questions, is innovation and fundamental rights or data protection competing or working hand in hand? I'm going to say working hand in hand, but there is a but. And I'm going to start with a misconception that very often there is a perception that sometimes companies do not like privacy rights or would prefer to not have them. And that's not the case. For European tech companies, Europe is our first market, sometimes the only market where we operate. And our consumers very much like their fundamental rights, they like consumer protection, they like their privacy. And this is central to how we operate today. For the simple reason is that if consumers are not happy with our services, they'll move to an international competitor who might offer cheaper prices. So no, it is important that privacy rights work hand in hand with innovation. And that works in the B2C concept or in the B2B. B2C, consumers need to be pleased, and B2B, very often, the first time you operate through another business, they ask you, are you GDPR compliant? And if you're not, you very are scoped out of the procedure. So that said, and I'm coming to the but, today we are hearing from European tech companies and companies more broadly that it is quite a jungle to navigate. The compliance regime, it's quite difficult. Draghi pointed out more than 100 laws, 270 enforcing authorities, and we very much see that with the GDPR. The GDPR is a very good text that aims to harmonize data protection rules, aims to kind of have a true free flow of data in the single market and protect consumers and Europeans' privacy. And we love those principles. Now, in practice, have we reached those objectives? Unfortunately not. So we very much would like to see the GDPR promises put in practice and translated on the ground. And we would like to go from that jungle that is difficult to navigate through a puzzle where rules fit together, where enforcing authority speaks together, and where compliance is a lot easier. And I think that's where we aim to go, and that's why the European Tech Alliance very much welcomed the European Commission simplification agenda, because it's very much benefits European tech. We need that simplification. That means going from the jungle to a puzzle. That certainly does not mean removing fundamental rights. We need to protect our fundamental rights and we need to keep our standards. What we can do is removing multiple overlaps, or making sure that when you ask one legal questions, you get one legal answer. Having one market, one rulebook, one future. Not one legal question, 27 answers. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Consistency is key. Agustin, do you think that strong privacy safeguard actually can be competitive advantages?
Thank you very much for having us in this conversation. I think we have shared several panels already with Victoria on similar topics. When we look at the regulatory framework, especially at the European level, we also need to think that this is not only needed in order to reduce fragmentation between the member states, and was one of the reasons why we have GDPR and not the GDPD. And in that context, through not only the implementation of fundamental rights, we also create the frameworks for people to trust the services across the union. There is an ongoing narrative, of course, that too much regulation is going to stifle innovation, so on and so forth, which is a very dangerous narrative, if I may, because it is regulation what creates the conditions for legal certainty. And when you have legal certainty, especially in a model like in Europe, with many different national markets integrated in a single market, you need to be able to trust a system in order to create this scalability and growth. And a system where people need to be able to trust those services. And why is this important for scalability? Because it is essential to have a level playing field, as we say, in order for competition to thrive. We know that data is an extremely important input in the development of services. Personal data, it is an important input as well. The question is who is going to capture this input? Without rules, only those larger dominant players are going to be able to take advantage of this because they have already widespread services that are being used by consumers across the union. But what you want is that also consumers can choose for smaller European firms that are trying to do a great job in offering their services. And without those rules, you don't create the conditions for these companies also to be able to access this data that consumers are willing to provide for through consent frameworks. But this is, of course, an economic argument. But what we cannot forget is that there is a very important fundamental rights dimension that is often overlooked in these competitiveness discussions. And of course, we're going to tell more about the simplification agenda in itself. Making things simpler for everyone, no one can be against that. The question is how we do it. And obviously, the risk that we are seeing that simplification becomes deregulation. Of course, there is no problem per se to discuss whether a framework is up to date. The question is how we do this. And there is where we have raised several concerns also together with other civil society organizations and also companies across Europe. Thank you.
So we can retain the world of trust that is key for also having clients and to be competitive, and so that data protection is useful for that. And then, yes, I think that was the purpose of the DMA and the Data Act was also to try to have an environment of trust, but also enabling other companies to access data and to have to enter into market or to develop like alternative services and to complete the other ones. Thank you very much for those reflections, Augustine. So, Charlie, we have now made consideration of those additional regulations that were complementing the GDPR. So data protection is only one aspect of the regulation of the digital economy. And the GDPR took so many years of preparation, negotiation, and then suddenly we saw a multiplication of digital regulation that were arriving. Do you believe that the digital society required all of this or could have been done differently?
Thank you, Isabel. Thanks to the EDPB for having me and to share this panel. Thanks for CPDP as well, of course, for the conference, and thanks for the question. I think the GDPR was a kind of landmark achievement, one we should all be very proud of. So it's clearly not a perfect tool, but almost by design, and that's what makes it so good. Because principle-based legislation, we know they cannot tackle reality in a very granular way, but basically they help by their agility and versatility to keep the headline on what really matters. What followed, it's a bit different. So we really saw what we call a regulatory wave or regulatory avalanche, depending on the season probably. But you have so much deregulation, not providing new rules, but regulation in the digital sphere that really hit the way at fast pace. Probably they were needed because we had evolved and technology evolved fast. But I believe the pace of that all of those regulations came and hit us were certainly overwhelming. And so really the question is, are we smart by regulating by volume, or should we do something different? I want to test that by just looking, like taking the time to look at what we achieved. And I wonder, frankly, if all of the new regulation that came out in the digital sphere, they really produced measurable, better outcome for consumer, for innovation, and even for market dynamic. So if what they aim to tackle is make sure that the EU champion thrive, are we creating those conditions by all of the body of law that we have produced? I'm not sure of the answer. What I'm pretty sure about is that it creates complexity and compliance burden for a lot of companies, whether they are big or small. And frankly, they also create a movement that I'm slightly more worried about, is that you see global players not considering EU anymore as a potential market, or delaying launch of products and services because of the perception that the regulatory maze in the EU is too big. And don't get me wrong on that, because I don't mean to say that it's not a good thing that sometimes you have to wait for a product to meet the EU values. That's not at all what I'm saying. It's just, I'm saying that we are potentially creating the condition for the EU to be seen as a market people don't want to enter. And that, I believe, probably leaves the door open for the European ones who wants to be there, which is good. But I don't think it creates a very good dynamic, let's say. So concluding on that point, so really the digital society requires governance, no doubt. But governance cannot be a synonym of volume. So we need a regulation that really make European citizens probably safer and that make the European companies more competitive. But I'm not sure that we really have achieved that with the flow that we saw happening. Thank you.
Someone willing to add on that? So, yeah, you can, Augustine, go ahead.
Sorry, if I might to react on that point. You mentioned the question, of course, of perception. You know, what is the perception of companies, no launching their products in Europe? And I would just like to bring one example. It is outside the remit of the GDPR, but I think it's worth mentioning it. You probably remember that Apple, when they launched the instant interpretation in the AirPods, they say that because of the DMA, they didn't want to launch it in Europe. Europe is far too complex. But when you look at Europe, it's an extremely important market for these companies. It represents a significant part of their worldwide turnover. So what happened a few months later, who released iPods with the instant interpretation was Apple. The only difference is that in the US, you can find them only on iPods. In Europe, you can benefit with this technology across different devices without having to depend only on Apple products. So this is an example of how actually the perception does not correspond to how the companies are behaving in reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, in Europe, we have also seen that, for instance, there were some AI models that were delaying some deployment, etc., because we at the EDPB, we worked on an opinion on AI model and how the legitimate interest can be used and rely upon. And then we provide a kind of criteria under which legitimate interest can be used, and we consulted also the private sector on that, and I think it was done in 2-3 months at the end of 2024. But then at the end of the day, then those companies enter into the market with while respecting and knowing the condition under which they should enter into the market. So I can see that also not so, I mean, in this example, the delay was not so long, and it was in fact, in my view, more compliance. So maybe I will move now on this digital omnibus with you, Jan Costein. For you, how can policymakers simplify compliance while preserving legal certainty and high standards? So do you believe that digital omnibus, which is aiming at reforming data protection regulations and legal framework, fundamentally will support European competitiveness and innovation?
It works. Good day, everyone. That's a very good question. An answer to that question would make my life much easier, but I will attempt to answer it. How to balance these two, these fundamental rights we're trying to protect, the frameworks that we have drawn up to protect those fundamental rights, and on the other hand, the technological innovation that we see rapidly happening around the world and also in Europe, that we aim to guide, to steer. I think maybe in a reply also to the first question you posed, I think it's always very important to keep in the back of our minds that fundamental rights are not an obstacle to innovation. They're not an obstacle. They're a beacon. They're like a lighthouse. They guide innovation, because innovation in the end is just changing the status quo. The real question is, how do we want that status changed for the better? And fundamental rights are the lessons we learned over 2,000 years of getting it wrong, and help us steer that innovation in the right direction. Now, of course, the frameworks that we draw up to protect those rights, those principles, be it competitiveness, open markets, be it privacy, those frameworks are not perfect. Definitely not. They're made by humans, and by nature, there's always room for improvement. But let's not confuse the two. I used to have a professor of history who compared laws to trees. They grow, and they will grow wildly. So they need pruning now and then to ensure that they blossom. Now, when you prune a tree, you don't take an axe to the roots. You take a tiny scissor and you cut it off just above the buds in order to have it in the right shape. So to answer your question, how do we balance this? How do we ensure that competitive? How do we change our frameworks? I would say the challenge is to make a cut between those quick fixes, the overlap, the regulatory burden that was already described by the other speakers, and cut back, like these inefficient frameworks, but distinguish those frameworks from the underlying principles, those fundamental values that we took many millennia to discover and to formulate. And if we can make that cut, then the omnibus will be a great success.
Thank you for this image. So, Agustin, looking at you, I understand that for Berg, it's important that simplification, you said that already, does not risk becoming deregulation. Do you believe that some element of the digital omnibus crossed that line?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. Very wise, your professor, actually. Yeah? And I think I will continue on your metaphor. And indeed, what needs pruning in this legal framework. And then we go to the courts of the matter when it comes to data protection, which are the definitions. And here I think what the Commission is doing with the proposal is really digging into the roots, and cutting the roots as deep as possible. Sorry for being so explicit. And I will elaborate on this. We have been, and I think people know us very well, we're very constructive when it comes to EU lawmaking and very pragmatic as well. So we are not against, per se, the simplification agenda, making things simpler for companies to comply with the rules and obligations is only in the benefit of consumers. Simplifying the lives of citizens that move across the borders, it's only in their benefit. The question is when this simplification becomes deregulation. And unfortunately, this is what we are seeing happening here. In the field of data protection, there could be a lot to simplify, for example, on the rights of complainants in order to get decisions to be delivered in a timely manner, which are important not only for the affected parties, but also for legal certainty. We are still waiting for decisions of complaints that we have submitted almost 10 years ago in the areas before the areas DPA. And this is where we believe that simplification would have been actually very helpful. But instead, what we are looking is at changing fundamental elements of the data protection regime. And the EDPB has a very clear opinion in this matter that we very much support. And where do we draw the line of what is simplification and what becomes deregulation? And we take the case of the definition of personal data, which is a fundamental element of the whole system. The European Commission here, they basically took the definition of the SRB judgment, which is a case-specific judgment that you look at the specific facts of the case, and they generalize it. When you look at how lawmaking should go, this is not a good example of better regulation. I'm sorry to be very blunt. This is an example of very bad regulation because you are taking one definition, one interpretation on a specific set of facts, and you're generalizing it. And you do that even without having a proper impact assessment, which is an essential element of EU lawmaking. So here we do believe that the Commission actually is across the line from a simplification to a deregulation attempt. And we are seeing that also reflected in the discussion by the co-legislators. Some of the Council have also been very clear that this is not the path that they would like to see the discussion going. The European Parliament situation is a bit unclear at the moment. So it's really unfortunate that in this case, this simplification agenda is going much further than we expected. It can still be corrected, that is in the camp of the co-legislator, but also give us a very clear, signal that we have to be very careful when it comes to decision-making process. We have built over the last decades a very robust system about how EU laws are being made. We have been extremely supportive of the better regulation agenda. We have contributed very actively because this is the fundament for the development of a democratic system at the European level. And through this simplification agenda, we risk undermining that. And by undermining that, we're also creating a democratic deficit at the end of the day. So here we need to be extremely careful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, that was also the point of view of the European Data Protection Board, even if I must say that for the Netherlands, there were a lot of other proposals that we did support in this proposal, like on data breach notification, DPI, etc. So, Victoria, what are your views about the Digital Omnibus? Do you believe that it will facilitate compliance?
Thank you very much. Well, as always, there are some good elements, and there are some elements that were to be improved. I'm going to start by one of the elements that we like, is the clarification of personal data. For companies, it's actually quite simple, is what is personal data, and should I then enter into the GDPR compliance, yes or no? And today what we are seeing is that you have different interpretation from one member state to another, and it's actually not really creating a true single market in Europe, which is unfortunate. And hence we welcomed the Commission's clarification. Now, I totally hear your point, Augustine, on the need to respect the fundamental rights, and we would agree with that. But for us, the Strain case kind of really illustrates better what is personal and what is non-personal data. So I'm going to illustrate very concretely what we hope as companies is if you have 100, let's say, gigabyte of data, and your data protection authority tells you that 99% of that is personal data, well, you need to comply with the GDPR and you'll do the paperwork. And definitely protecting users and businesses' privacy is super important, so we'll do it, and it was the cost and the money, no problem at all. The question is, are we really certain that 99% of that 100% gigabyte are personal data and are really worth being protected as deeply as the GDPR required? And that's where actually from one country to another, the interpretation varies, which is problematic. So what we would like to see is having a better understanding of what is personal and non-personal data, so that we can protect the data that really should be protected and is important to be protected, and that we can use the data otherwise. One element that we, European tech, very much support and push for is privacy-enhanced technologies. PETS for the acronym. And that technology would allow you to pseudonymize, anonymize, tokenize. We have a paper on it explaining the different PETs that exist, because depending on the scenarios, you use different technologies. But that would really kind of, within the framework, ensure that your data pool is more privacy enhanced. And so based on that, it could potentially not be considered as personal data, be scoped out. Maybe PETs will only concern, out of my example, the 100 gigabyte, only percent 10%, so 10 gigabyte, for instance. But that's already worth making sure that all resources then on those 10 gigabyte is less costly, and we can then better invest into either innovation or better protect the 90% that remains. What I really want to stress is that we would like the Digital Omnibus to incentivize the use of privacy-enhanced technologies. Today, those tech are not really meeting a legal framework that is clear. And we would like to make sure that those technology are framed by European Commission guidelines through the GDPR Article 41A, to be specific. And why do we need the Commission kind of to frame it? One, there is pet bashing. Let's be honest about it. They're good pets, and they're pets that pretend to be privacy friendly, but they're not. So if you have at least guidelines or standards from the Commission, it already set the frames, and then you're sure that you don't have pets bashing, and then you also ensure that you have fair competition. Because I want to be also very honest here. So often we saw with the GDPR, you don't know what the GDPR means to you. No problem. Pay me 1K and I'll do compliance for you. I don't want that for the future on pets. I want to be able to compete with all the American or African or American or Chinese or whatever companies. So if I have a framework from the Commission that tells me what is good privacy-enhanced technologies and how I can use them, and that will kind of enable and incentivize this tool. And that will also incentivize a fair competition within the single market. And I think that's very much needed. Maybe the two little point is we really need a true data economy to be able to train AI. And so we really see pets as an enabler to have a data economy that is privacy enhanced, that protects consumers and users' interest. And I think we need to look further into this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, on this concept of personal data anonymization, pseudonymization, just to so recall that indeed the data protection authorities are the ones applying and enforcing the GDPR, and we are working at the level of the European Data Protection Board for issuing guidance, also taking into consideration the development of the different case law on the subject matter. So normally we also held a public consultation in December on the matter, and there will be also more consistent guidelines on the topic also, considering the last case law. Someone would like to add anything about the omnibus?
Yeah, if I may, and I'll be a bit blunt, but I think all of the debate of, and let's say the legislative course of the omnibus proposal shows that simplification is very good as a motto, but when you need to get actually to make it happen, it's an awful of a task. And I believe that the way it was approached make it probably even more complicated, because when you seek to have a kind of big clash or put in one bucket a number of different elements where you need to find an agreement on all of them to then achieve a result, I'm not overly positive that what we will have in the end, if we have something, will actually deliver on simplification. I thought that there were other elements of the GDPR that could be reviewed, if you ask me, like enforcement strategies, that would actually make the regulation work better. rather than trying to fix here and there things that probably no one asked for, or if they ask for it, they ask for their own agenda, but I don't really believe that they will serve the protection of fundamental rights. I'll stop there.
Thank you. So even if I think that, for instance, the idea of having templates, etc., is something that we also initiated at the level of the European Data Protection Board. We already did one for the data protection impact assessment, and one is coming on data breach certification soon. So now I would like to address maybe this global question on the risk of under regulating, and starting with you, Charlie. So competitiveness is probably linked to these several factors. In the fast-paced digital environment, what are the risks linked to over and under regulating? And are there other elements in your views which may impact European competitiveness, such as investment, scale, and infrastructure?
Yeah, thanks. I believe that's a very important question. And really, for me, European competitiveness in those fields has not so much to do with over-regulating or under-regulating. We know that there are excess in both ways, so that's not very satisfactory. But for me, really the bottleneck here is really infrastructure. And I really believe that, unfortunately, fixing infrastructure is not something you can do with regulation. So the main challenge we have in the digital economy, it's physical. So we can build a tech ecosystem, we can cultivate talents, we do that, we can fund startups, we can create as many as we want regulatory sandboxes. All of those are policy choices. They can happen quickly, they are actually happening, but what you cannot do is build data centers, hyperscaler, having the hardware and the manufacturing capabilities overnight. There are, of course, progress towards achieving that, but those will come in a timing that has nothing to do with legislative cycles. So it will take decades for Europe to actually eventually become self-supporting in those spheres. And that's for me, that's really the main challenge we face is really that one. If you look from a non-European company perspective, investment decisions are finally very simple. Is where can I deploy capital to achieve scale efficiently? And that requires indeed the proximity with data centers, reliable high-speed connectivity, access to energy at competitive price, something we are not very good at all in Europe as well. We struggle on many of those fronts. And so if you look only at, for example, the semiconductor supply chain, it's no surprise that those, we all know that Europe cannot really produce them. It's the US and Taiwan, basically. And you will not create that supply chain overnight. So really to answer your question, yeah, regulation matters for sure. To quote Macron, fighting the right balance is important, but really our main issue in relation to digital competitiveness is, I believe, not a regulatory debate, but much more how we will scale up infrastructure. Thank you.
So we see that the question is going beyond simple. It's not only policy one and regulation, but Jan Consten, you are more acting as being a co-legislator, taking part to the council activities. So since Draghi report, the EU legislator was planning for having a simplification agenda with those omnibuses. Do you think that Europe is really over-regulating, or if Europe will not regulate, in fact, do we face a risk of having more fragmentation? Because when there is a topic that is in an emerging area that in fact concerns everyone, like AI, if Europe would not make any regulation, then it would mean maybe that member states will do it at national level, and then you will face even more fragmentation?
So thank you for that question. And I love how you chose the order of these answers, because indeed, it's not only about the rules, it's also about the infrastructure. Maybe we can get back to that later on in this discussion. And now you're asking a lawmaker, should we regulate? Well, give someone a hammer and they will start hammering everything. So yeah, we should have laws, because as lawmakers, we love to draw them up. I think over-regulation is always a danger. And it's a danger for everyone. It's a danger for Brussels. It's a danger for Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Well, technically The Hague, but everybody knows Amsterdam. It's a danger for our American friends, and it's actually also a danger for our Chinese friends. So yes, overregulation is always a danger, especially when you're trying to regulate a very quickly developing new technology. I think the big elephant in the room is AI. AI is a game changer. Before AI, we already saw platform economies arising. Suddenly, only 5 to 6 players own the internet. We never predicted this in the beginning. And in legal theory, there's actually a term for this. It's the Collingridge dilemma. And it's, as a regulator, when the technology is still young and you can actually steer its direction, you have no idea what you're doing. But by the time you have the experiencing of knowing where you should push it, it's too late, because the technology already changed the world. So here we are. We're going to wait, but then be confronted with a status quo we can no longer change. Or are we going to trying to change, to steer, with the danger of maybe having too many rules? I think as Europeans, we can be very proud in what we regulated. I think the GDPR, again, yes, we can improve it, but it was a world example, copied around the world. We were the first to think about the concept of privacy in the digital world, and we were copied across the world by other countries, other blocs that thought we want to have the same protection for our citizens. Same with platform regulation, with the Digital Markets Act, Digital Service Act. That was very innovative lawmaking. Also, a lawmaker can be innovative. And the same with the AI Act. I mean, the AI Act came out before LLMs were the latest craze. So we have a forward-looking view, and we're trying to tackle the problems before they arise. But here we are, LLMs are around the corner. Suddenly the world is going in fifth gear. And we realize that with all our well-meant regulation, we might have gotten some of the details wrong. So the simplification agenda is a very important one. I mean, stakeholders are giving feedback on what we came out with, and they are asking us to improve on what they have to comply with. So I guess maybe to then actually answer your question, which is on fragmentation, the alternative for having laws, is a fragmented market. I think we shouldn't fear fragmentation. Europe is united in diversity. So it can be a perfect legal laboratory. Little member states can try legal things, and then the best solution can be lifted up to a Brussels solution. But here we're talking about a topic that just crosses border. I mean, as the Netherlands, we could have a brilliant law on regulating AI. We could have a brilliant law on regulating the internet. But I'm very proud of my country, but nobody's going to really take into account what these 16 million people in a corner of the globe want to do. So I think the question is not so much whether we should fear fragmentation. The question is more, can we be more effective for all our citizens at an EU level? And the answer for me would be yes, we can. So we should regulate as Europe. We should listen to our stakeholders. We shouldn't be afraid of maybe oversteering, but we should listen when we need to correct. And I think we're actually doing this.
Thank you. So we made also reference to what was developed in the US. Looking at the AI, now the US is considering an executive order on the AI tools that will pose cybersecurity risk. So it's a remarkable change from the earlier laissez-passer trend in the US regarding to AI. Does this change show that other jurisdictions start to wake up, and that fact the regulation is in fact necessary, Victoria?
I think, the US is going to do its own stuff, and China is going to do its own stuff. And Europe should kind of be more active than reactive. the AI Act was really aimed at making sure that when it's high risk, you need to kind of make sure you know it's high risk and you frame it. And I think that's essential, that we keep that approach to balance kind of the ability to innovate and the ability to kind of respect our fundamental rights. That's the starting point. Now, if I may, I really want to react to, we should not fear fragmentation. Fragmentation is a problem. Fragmentation should not be continued, but you could have consistency coming from the 27 capitals. And you could have diversity, but working together in unity. Being Belgium, we say l'union fait la force. So I'm definitely going to support that approach. It doesn't mean you need to centralize everything at European Union level. No. But having fragmentation and 27 interpretation of a similar text or similar provision is extremely problematic. Makes us lose a lot of time and money and resources that should be invested in being competitive globally, whether it's in AI or in other elements. Moving forward, if we want to remain competitive and if in 100 years we want to be proud and give kind of a leading market to our grandchildren, I think it's essential that we ask the right question now and that we are effective. What we are seeing, and I think you mentioned it, Charlie, that simplification is a buzzword. It's very nice, but the devil is in the details and it's very complicated to make it happen in practice. And we see that whether it's the definition of personal data, whether it's on how you can train AI or on how you consent online. But these are difficult questions that, at least in Europe, we can very respectfully agree to disagree. Well, when I see in other regions, that's not the case. So I'm still very hopeful for the future.
Thank you very much for that hopeful message. So now I would like to dig into the concept of digital sovereignty, strategic. You wanted to react? Go ahead. This is free.
If I
Yes, of
may,
course.
because I completely agree with you, and I hope I was not misunderstood by opening with a quote that says we shouldn't fear fragmentation. So let me clarify. We shouldn't fear fragmentation as a principle, but I think on this particular topic, I fully agree. We do need to prevent fragmentation on such an important topic like getting the digital space, getting AI right. So indeed, Draghi was very clear. Fragmentation is holding Europe back, and the Netherlands fully agrees on this. I tried to distinguish between the idea of fragmentation as a general principle and the specific case in front of us, where we are very much aligned.
Thank you. So we move then into this, digital sovereignty, strategic autonomy. Augustine, the EU is looking for more autonomy for its technologies and infrastructures for competitiveness purpose, but also to ensure that Europeans will have more control of their data and digital infrastructure, democratic processes. So we always discuss digital sovereignty for the perspective of the business and the companies and competitiveness, but I think it's nice to start with you because to see the consumer perspective of this. What should digital sovereignty deliver concretely to citizens? And how do we ensure that sovereignty policies remain citizen-centered than only industrial?
Thank you very much, and extremely topical discussion. And digital sovereignty means different things to different people. So I think that here trying to get a common understanding what we want to achieve, it's important. But also we need to look where we're coming from, why we're having this conversation. And this is triggered by the fact that we have become extremely dependent across aspects of our economy and society with foreign companies that come from countries that we thought they were very reliable, but then we realized that actually there's much more at risk. And that is across domains. In this community, we always refer to big tech companies, but even if you look at payment systems, we are extremely dependent on Visa and MasterCard. On fossil fuels, we know the story, how things went and are developing. So this comes as a question of independence. Looking it through the lenses of the consumers, this can be translated also to a question of autonomy. Now, do you have enough choices in order to decide who will handle your data if you want to communicate with your peers? Who is going to handle your data when you want to make an electronic payment, so on and so forth. The reality is that when we look at digital markets, there have been a trend of concentration, which has led to dominance. And with that, we have also have abuse of dominant positions, positions that have been acquired partly also through the collection of data. And of course, if you combine this scalability in data aggregation and concentration with extremely strong network effects, you ended up consumers being locked in certain ecosystems that's very difficult for challenger companies. For example, European companies that want to play by the rules to be able to compete on the merits. And there is, of course, where the question of legislation comes into place and enforcement. How do you create the right conditions for people to have choice? And I see here our Norwegian friends and colleagues are present, and they have done a fantastic campaign called Breaking Free, which actually look at how dominant players have been downgrading their services, because there is very little risk that people will go somewhere else because they are locked into their systems. And that has a direct impact on consumer welfare because actually you're getting worse services, or you ended up giving more data than what you expect, because you don't have this real alternative. So when I look at sovereignty or digital sovereignty, what it means from a consumer perspective, is have the ability to choose between different services and decide which services are more aligned not only with our European regimes and value, but also with your own personal values as well. If you want your data to be treated in a certain way with security and an assured level of safety, you should be able to do that and not to be resigned to certain services by incumbent providers that only end up strengthening their dominant position through the collection aggregation of this data.
Thank you very much. We have seen indeed in the last years an increasingly important interaction between the field of data protection and competition law that were already discussed many years ago, but that is becoming really in a daily practice with the DMA, but also with the enforcement, with the interaction between those fields of law. This is also a subject matter on which the European Data Protection Board works a lot as well, because indeed the data is really key and it's quite acknowledged, I think, from both parts. Charlie, how should Europe reconcile openness and security concerns around cloud, AI, semiconductors, and strategic infrastructure?
Thank you, Isabel. So let's first acknowledge that that's not an easy question. And if you believe you have a clear answer, it's probably that you are trying to sell something, because there is a lot of debate and I believe different elements that we should mention here. I think it's difficult because first, it rests on the premises that it's itself under strain, the idea that we operate in an open world. For decades, the European project was built on openness, like open market, open trade, open standard, free movement of data, with some protection, but still getting for the promotion of openness. And openness was not just an economic strategy, it was an identity. If you look at a country like mine, so Belgium, that's how we became something in the world, is by having an open economy, because serving just ourselves will not have made us going very far. And so whether we are still in that open world is, of course, something we should be asking ourselves. If you look at all of the geopolitical change and the uncertainty we have in that area, I believe, indeed, that question is even more complicated today. Agreeing to disagree, to use Victoria's motto with what Augustine just said, for me, the sovereignty debate is really one that should be tied up much more to national security question than to privacy. So for me, the sovereignty conversation is really relevant for matters where national security is at the heart. So for defense system, intelligence, critical government communication, all of those strategic assets, where indeed dependency to a foreign forces, let's say, that used to be a friend but that can not be a friend the next day, is indeed one that bear a risk profile that is very hard to accept by now. And I can see that indeed that sovereignty debate has been like spreading and went into data protection, commercial cloud services, and even on routine enterprise software, area for which I believe at least security rationale is weaker, and where, at least based on the infrastructure point I made before, I believe that very often promoting a sovereign solution often means, at least for now, increased cost and like even reduced choice and slow adoption. So if we speak about sovereignty to protect military communication infrastructure, I believe I'm fully in line with it. If we want to go deeper, let's talk a little while to make sure that we go to the bottom of the question. Frankly, and that's what saved me for responding to that complicated question, I believe that for now, the question is even slightly rhetorical, because I don't really believe that we have the capacity to be sovereign in a number of the things we are talking about, whether it's very basic enterprise software up to the very important, let's say, cloud infrastructure to protect military intelligence, for example. And so, yeah, it's, let's see where we ended up, but I think that if we promote sovereignty, it means that we should promote EU sovereignty, because like national sovereignty doesn't mean a lot, at least to me, if we move sovereignty debate into the privacy space. And there, I have to say that I'm also not overly optimistic, because when you look at how the debate is fostered at EU level, every member state has its own definition of what EU sovereignty should be, and it's one that it probably needs to protect its own interest. There is no need to quote example, but if you look just at France, Italy, and Germany, just coincidentally, you see a lot of that happening. And so I'm hoping that we will be able to achieve an Airbus of privacy in that field, but I'm not overly optimistic that that's going to happen.
So you were also questioning if we still have really an open economy, etc., but we still have a lot of global supply chain, open market, etc. And Jan Kosten, do you think that sovereignty can coexist with this global consideration, and how the EU can remain open while also reducing strategic dependencies?
I'm going to start by saying that big question is a bit above my pay grade. So you would have to ask my prime minister to get an answer on behalf of the Netherlands. But I am happy to touch on some topics that I think are included in that question, on which we do have a very clear position. And it's also a reply to what Henri said before, which I thought was a very smart comment on the need to not only look at the regulation, but also at the physical reality of technology. But maybe to first react to one of the last things you said, the meaning of sovereignty. I was in a meeting in the council and somebody quoted a French politician, Talleyrand, I think it was, saying men invented language in order to hide his thoughts. And when we use the word sovereignty, everybody means something else. I think here the question is, coming from the Netherlands, sovereignty would relate to my member state. So if I'm proposing more sovereignty, in a way, I'm saying less EU. I think that's definitely not the way to go. I think for the Netherlands, that's not the way to go. We strongly believe that even our national sovereignty is better served by strengthening the EU sovereignty. So I really like this remark, which level of sovereignty are we talking about? Now, I think also in the international relationship, our fates across the ocean have always been strongly intertwined. And still, but up to recently, even more so, the relationship was very constructive. And also the discussions on how to regulate technology, there was a lot of interaction, a lot of exchange between the US and Europe. So the question of sovereignty was never seen as one of a zero-sum game, so to say. Now, I think one of the key words, again mentioned by previous speakers here, is dependability becomes a problem if it's a one-way street. If I am only dependent on the other one, but the other one is not dependent on me, then it's easily a position that is abused. So I think Europe indeed has a challenge to ensure that it is in a position of strength. And in the technological sector, the Netherlands has been calling for something that we call the tech sovereignty stack, in which we propose that the EU should ensure that on all levels, from the hardware up to the software, we ensure our sovereignty, also to create a market, an ecosystem where one layer of the tech stack kind of creates demand of another layer of the tech stack. Now, this is not something we're going to build overnight, but it is something that should be a longer aim. In that sense, we're also very much looking forward to next week when we expect the Commission to come out with a sovereignty tech plan, 27th.
Yesterday they said it will be postponed in June.
Oh, well, then I'm not looking forward to it. I'm just regretting that they chose, maybe they took into account our non-paper. Let's approach this positively. So here we are hoping that they will incorporate the Dutch idea on the EU sovereignty tech stack. So I think that's for me on the question, can we combine sovereignty? Can we still keep those open markets? It's a very big question. I think it should be our aim, but I think currently Europe is in a state where indeed it should ensure that it has a position of strength to operate in that open world that we're still trying to aim for.
Thank you very much, Jan Kosten. So maybe as we have like 10 minutes left, I would like to see if there are any questions from the audience. Can see several. I don't know how it works in this room. Someone is moving on with a mic. Please, can you please introduce yourself before speaking, and can you please try to really ask a question and not to be too long, so then there will be several people that can ask questions. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. So my name is Fabiana Da Pieve. Just would like to say that in Europe we do not have the hardware to compute on encrypted data, which would allow to ensure, at least from the technical point of view, privacy in AI training. So from the point of view of the hardware, sovereignty and autonomy, no, we do not have this hardware. So it's problematic to ensure sovereignty from the very basic layer of the technological stack. I also would like to say that there are many pets. Most of them are not scalable, are not robust. They still lack standardized interfaces. We are undergoing the largest global cryptographic transition now to have reliable pets that would allow Europe to be autonomous, sovereign, whatever. It will take decades. So it's really a long way, and I think that maybe discussion should really be more anchored to technical aspects that would allow really to move forward. And there are big policy gaps starting from the very CHIPS policy. So I just wanted to comment.
Thank you very much. But then I would, if I may, I would like to really ask the ones that have really questioned, that raise their hands, and not the one that would like to make comments, because then maybe you can make comment on the side after, if it's possible. So someone is on the back, and then two on the back, and then after in the front.
Yes, Jaime Bernal, Utrecht University. So following up a little bit the discussion, I'm going to try to be as quick as possible. Yeah, I think there is this sovereignty fatigue because it seems like a buzzword, overuse. Also, because of the extraterritoriality of the laws, US laws, FISA, GDPR, also in China, and US Cloud Act, and so on. We need other terms like autonomy and so on. So I've been writing a paper that is almost going to get published on data agency. The agency is a good word because it reveals that the world is connected and we have challenges that are shared. And also in the era of AI, agency is something that is also shared with machines.
Excuse me, can I ask you what is your question, please?
Yeah, so my question is that, do you see that the EU could continue in this way, being a little bit in a third position, but building the infrastructure and benefiting from the technology that is coming in and so on, while building the institutions, laws and so on, and one day triumph or something? Maybe less than decades?
Okay, so you ask if there is a hope, in fact, for sovereignty. Maybe before getting to my panelists, I will see if there is another question from the audience. Maybe we can take them on the left and then in front and after. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, very quickly. Sovereignty is not actually a keyword in the Digital Omnibus, so I'm very curious about the link. Because if we simplify, as it seems, we are actually giving a great advantage to the big-sized companies. The simplification and relativization of concept of personal data, or the Article 22 relaxing redefinition. So I'm just wondering whether actually it's kind of the opposite, like the Digital Omnibus on data is kind of going more towards the bigger tech, bigger companies, or not. Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe the last one in front of us, or maybe, I don't know. Sorry, we'll go on the first row. And then we can see after if we still have time for you.
So one question on the definition of personal data and codification of Court of Justice case law, maybe more for Augustine. Don't you think actually that the codification of this long-standing case law of the Court of Justice that started in 2016 with Breyer, recognizing the relative definition of personal data, would actually bring more harmonization by putting clearly in the text that the definition of personal data is relative, thereby binding not only data protection authorities, but also national courts, so that we have a data level playing field in the EU?
Thank you very much. So I move to all of you. Do you want to start, Augustine, with the last question?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. It's not the only domain in which the decision makers have codified case law. When it comes to personal data, what I believe the situation is slightly different is because it's case specific. And when we look at the case law of the Court of Justice, there are different interpretations of what is personal data. This very narrow interpretation that has been taken by the European Commission is based on a single set of facts, facts. So here we have to be extremely careful. What I think is important in that regard when it comes to how we define personal data is the role of the enforcers and the regulators, which are the ones that need, based on the guidance provided by the Court of Justice, to start adjusting, obviously, the interpretation and indicating how, in the specific set of facts, one should understand or interpret data protection.
Indeed, this is also what we did with Schrems 2 ruling when there was this recommendation on the supplementary measures, the concept that has been created by the court, and then indeed it was the DPP provided the answers to try to guide the sector. Do you have any answer to those questions relating to any kind of hope into sovereignty will deliver within the coming years? And also, if you, according to your point of view, the Digital Omnibus at the opposite is more favoring more like the biggest player and not really the smaller ones?
Okay, I feel that that third question was more directed for me. The answer is clearly no. European tech needs simplification. Europe needs to have a true data economy, because the data economy that is private friendly, that is consumer friendly. Yeah, I'm gonna keep it short. Okay. That means that if you have a strong data economy, you can train your AI algorithms. With AI, you can do amazing elements, amazing feature, and your companies can be more competitive, more effective, potentially, and so on. If we don't have a true data economy in Europe, at least for European tech, it will be extremely difficult for us to compete and to be able to grow and scale and conquer either the true single market or even offer a product across the world. Or American, Chinese, African, Latin America, regardless of where they're from, they always have the data from their home countries or home regions, and they use the lessons learned from those regions in Europe. So the classic example is, in Europe, I very often have that jeans with that white t-shirt. If I cannot make that association from a European tech perspective, make sure that an American tech or Chinese tech will be able to make that association, and then consumer will find it that the shopping experience is better on those platforms. So they're not going to buy on mine and they switch to them. So long story short, we need a data economy. We need the roles to be like a puzzle that fits together, not like a jungle that it's difficult to navigate. European tech needs simplification. Whether it benefits American tech, Chinese tech, I don't care. I need European tech to be able to grow, scale, to offer an alternative. And for us, being able to offer a strong alternative is where we want to go with tech sovereignty, is the freedom of choice. Thank you.
Jan Kosten.
So I would love to react to this, but let me first answer the most important question raised today in this room. Is there hope? Of course. You're young, you're smart, join the commission, write a brilliant law, and make sure that we win this race of the world. You're from Utrecht University, it's a very good university, I know it very well. So yes, of course there's hope. Don't look for all the solution to your lawmakers, because in the end, business, they are the ones that are going to change the world, so we can just hope to steer them. Then reacting to you, who benefits? I think it's a tricky one. Maybe one of the first comments, we talked about the branches and the roots. I mean, the definition of personal data, it's already been mentioned. It's a fundament. It's one of those roots. So it's hard to start tweaking this, especially if you lack the impact assessment that we normally have, where we can see who actually benefits. Now, if you want to know whether American companies benefit, just look at their position papers and look what they're asking for. And they're probably asking for stuff that they benefit from. But I agree with you, it doesn't really matter whether they benefit. The most important question is, do European companies benefit? We shouldn't be too afraid of also having the Americans enjoy a better regulation on our side of the pond. Again, the issue here, it's hard to oversee the impact of such fundamental changes, training AI on personal data, training AI on sensitive personal data, opening up the definition of sensitive personal data in this very short omnibus process. As the Netherlands, we feel that's a discussion that we should have with all thoroughness and all attention and needed for it. Yeah.
Yeah, we understand that. At the DPP, Charlie, you also wanted to...
If I can do the 15-second
yes.
conclusion, hoping to reconcile hope and everything together. So, while I believe I have expressed that I was not very hopeful that the simplification agenda will deliver, I'm more hopeful is everyone consider that it's going to do the bad result, because that's how compromise are drawn. So let's hope that the privacy advocates are unhappy, that the one representing the companies are not happy, so that in the end we get something that eventually works. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your attention, for having been with us today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much also to our panelists. Please applaud them.